Welcome to the 146th episode of the Hope Illuminated podcast, where we share powerful stories, science, and well-being strategies. Here, isolation and despair can be defeated and a passion for living rekindled. No flashlight required for our journey, just fired up listeners ready to gain guidance from our international experts. Today's topic takes one of our common topics a step further. If you've listened to this podcast at all, you know that I'm a huge proponent of storytelling as being good for the storyteller, good for the listener, and something that can change culture by telling a more powerful tale. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I have here my guest, Alex Bush, and we are going to talk about her journey in making meaning out of her loss by sharing her story with the different forms of media, both traditional media and social media, and some of the lessons that she's learned along the way. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm super thrilled that you're here, and really grateful for the work that you're doing in trying to, elevate the conversation and get people to engage with this very difficult topic, especially around suicide prevention and suicide loss, in a way that's helpful and meaningful to our communities. Tell us a little bit more about what you do every day.
Yeah, so I am from Denver, and I've been speaking for about 7 years now. I started when I was 16, and I've been kind of sharing my story of my experiences with suicide and mental health around the country. I've spoken to about 16,000 people in different states. I just hit my 25 mark, but 25 states, but obviously over Zoom for the most part. But yeah, so that's kind of what I do. And then I'm also on the state organization for Mississippi's board of directors of the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
So tell us a little bit more about the pathway here. What is the story that got you interested in suicide prevention?
Yeah, so I'll try to shorten it as much as I can because there's a lot. But like I said, I was born and raised in Denver, and I had a really great childhood in my early years. I'm an only child, so I was really, really close with both my dad and my mom growing up. And we really had a great family dynamic. My dad was a well-known real estate developer in Denver, and he really built his company and success from the ground up. However, things really took a turn when the economy crashed in 2008. He was working on one of his biggest projects, this giant luxury apartment complex. And like many people, he was under severe stress at that time, especially because real estate can be a tough business to be in when the economy is poor. And on top of the stress, he also had a very, very traumatic childhood and an untreated mental disorder. So the combination of everything really led him to use alcohol to cope. And for years, he had many ups and downs where he would stop drinking, then drink again, then quit again. But it really escalated right after my 16th birthday one night, and he got physical with both my mom and I. And my mom decided it just wasn't safe for us to be there anymore. And we left for good, and we moved into my mom's best friend's one-bedroom apartment. And things just continued to get worse once we moved out, and the alcohol quickly destroyed his brain and health overall in the following 6 months. And then on October 7th of 2017, he ended up taking his own life at the beginning of my junior year in high school. So,
thank you for sharing that story. And I've said to you and all the loss survivors that I cross paths with, I'm sorry for the reason that we're connected. And I'm grateful that you're out there trying to, make meaning and do some things that prevent what happened to your dad from happening to other people. And I think your story also is so indicative of how these things escalate and snowball around, right? So you have someone that has a underlying mental health condition, and then you add to that unimaginable stress where they were, thriving before, but that tips it over. And the vulnerability for alcohol to be a short-term problem solver in that moment. And then things just kind of domino from there, is a common pathway of how people find themselves isolated and in despair and overwhelmed. And I'm so sorry that happened to your family as well. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, so the first time I ever presented was in February of 2018, which was actually 5 months after my dad passed away. And there were really two main reasons why I volunteered to speak. The first reason was because my dad's death was fairly public in the Denver community, just because he was a well-known developer. And there were several newspaper articles that were published in the weeks after he passed. And they included some personal information and were read by some of my teachers and classmates. And to be honest, I was just really frustrated by the portrayal of my dad and the situation. But at the end of the day, I felt a responsibility to share an accurate portrayal of my family's story. And then the other reason why I was kind of motivated to speak was due to my experience at a school mental health presentation. And it had videos from the early 2000s, and the presenter basically just read statistics and everything off the slides. And throughout that hour-long lecture, my classmates were just so disengaged. And I saw a need for youth involvement in these conversations because that message was definitely not resonating with most of the people around me nor myself. So I ended up volunteering to speak at my school's diversity event soon after, and they had me speak alongside a professional from the Depression Center at the CU Denver Anschutz Medical Campus. And it was a great experience for me. It went really, really well. But I didn't end up speaking for a while after that.
Yeah. So you point out another really important piece of this is sometimes people think that the messaging that changes things are the daunting death data and some theories or some warning signs. And it doesn't. It just doesn't. People think it's the other, it's somebody else. It's the other. And when they hear stories like yours, they realize, oh, it's us. It's not the other. It's people I know. It's people close to me. It's people like me that have this happen to them. And they just perk up in a whole different way. The stories really get into their heart in ways that numbers and warning signs will never be able to touch people. So what was it like that first time you shared it, in addition to going, okay, this is much better than what I had before? What was it like for you to start speaking publicly?
Honestly, the first time I did it, I was so nervous. I had never given many presentations other than at school, and I definitely did not give them on something like that. But I think I prepared myself really well. I wanted to make sure I was able to say exactly what I wanted to say and just kind of tell my truth. And yeah, it went really, really well. And after that, the rest of my junior year, I kind of continued to just grieve and process the loss that I had just been through. And then I was diagnosed with ADHD and PTSD soon after. And it was undoubtedly one of the hardest times in my life. I was struggling to get out of bed, to shower, eat, basically function. My attendance at school was horrible, but I did get through the rest of the year. And summer started going into my senior year, and another tragedy struck. And one of my best friend's dads took his own life. Now, her situation was very different from mine. He lived in another state, and there wasn't a known substance use disorder, but I couldn't believe this was happening to another person in our group of friends. And I was hurting for the pain that I knew she was about to go through, since I had just lost my dad in the same way. And we all got through the summer, and it only got to about a month or two into senior year before more tragedy. And a friend of mine from middle school had taken his own life. And then another friend who was in the same friend group as him at the neighboring high school, she ended up taking her life 3 days after. And it was shocking. These two student deaths rocked the whole community, and no one knew what to do. And I remember sitting in the hallway with our principal, who was in her first year in that position. And she was just talking about how she couldn't even imagine if that happened to one of her students or what she would do as a principal in that position. And I was experiencing so much grief, and I had to channel it somewhere to survive. And so I saw that Nick's mom, one of the people who passed, had been posting on social media about their family's loss and trying to spread awareness. So I messaged her to just see how we could maybe put our two heads together.
Yes, I resonate a lot with that. I don't know not to do this, right? That sense of like compelled, like I must do something. I can't just sit here with wave after wave of tragedy coming at me and not try to do something that will help. And being called into something that you have no idea what it's going to be or what exactly your role is, but just feeling like I got to take action. And that sounds like what that first step was like for you. Cut to the chase today. What fuels your passion in this work that you're doing today as it has evolved over the last several years?
Yeah, so actually 1 year after my first presentation, that's when Maria and I ended up speaking together. And we told our stories from contrasting viewpoints. I was a child who lost their parent to suicide, and she was a parent who lost their child to suicide. And even while we were presenting, I could tell how engaged everyone was. And I think we were a great duo because she offered a more motherly perspective, whereas I was speaking to them as a peer. And interestingly enough, one of the most impactful moments of my public speaking experiences to this day actually happened at our last session. And people were slowly filtering out of the room and stopping by to say thank you. But my eye was drawn to one of my classmates who was still seated. And I had known this girl since early elementary school. And she was just one of the sweetest, most likable people at our school. And in the 10 years of knowing her, I had never seen her look even the slightest bit sad, but I could see pain all over her face. And when I walked up to her, I was kind of thinking she was upset about Nick because we all went to middle school together and their families knew each other, lived in the same neighborhood. But once Maria and I started talking to her, she just broke down about how much she had been struggling and how hearing our stories sparked that realization in her that she needed to reach out and get help. And seeing someone who I knew personally, and especially someone who was one of those people that never seemed to have a bad day, be so impacted by hearing our stories is really something I will never forget. Much of my talk stemmed from my personal losses, but that moment right there was the initial spark that drove my passion to another level, because I realized how much people connect to my story and saw how even the people that seem the happiest on the outside can struggle in silence. And unfortunately, I learned that sentiment even more so in a few months, which I can tell you about in a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. You never know. You never know sometimes where your story is going to land with people and who out there has been impacted. And I think many of us say, if we just help one person, it's worth it. But chances are really good just by how the numbers work. It's a lot more than one person that connects and feels seen and feels less alone when we do that. So what happened next?
So then the day after Maria and I presented, I started reaching out to local schools to see if they would be interested in having us come speak to their students. And at that time, I had no experience and was a high schooler. So I definitely had my fair share of rejections, but I just kept trying and emailing as many people as I could. And luckily enough, I did have some responses and success pretty quickly, and I started scheduling events. And then a month after that, one of our friends who was a year younger at my school ended up taking her own life. And this was the biggest shock I have ever experienced, because this girl was always cracking jokes and smiling and such a fun person to be around. But there was not a single person on this earth who knew how much she was hurting at the time. Not her friends, her family, no one knew. And I remember the day we found out, I immediately thought back to my conversation with our principal in the fall, because here we were 5 months later, losing a student to suicide, just like the other school.
Mm.
And it felt like I couldn't go more than a few months without a tragedy. And needless to say, it was a very, very painful and heartbreaking 1.5 years. Obviously, my dad's suicide affects me the most directly, but what I struggle with is the loss of lives that were just getting started. I have some peace with the fact that at least he got to live 49 years and have a family, travel, buy a house, and do some of the things that life has to offer. But they lost their lives before they could ever have those experiences. And those three friends are my driving force and motivation for advocating for youth and young adult mental health and suicide prevention. And despite my mental state after all of those deaths, I knew I had to continue and push through. So Maria and I spoke at tons of middle schools, high schools, and state-sponsored events together throughout the rest of the year. And then I was also able to tell my story in a Colorado PSA project called Teens to Teens, which was played in Colorado media and movie theaters and received a regional Emmy nomination. So that was really cool as well.
Validation for sure, to be heard and then lifted up, to help spread that message more broadly, knowing that your message is landing and is being respected. Must have felt good amidst all of the grief and loss and pain.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what, like I said, kind of helped me survive and get through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so bring us to full circle today. You know, you're now engaged in speaking to tens of thousands of people nationally and maybe even internationally. What has that been like?
It is so, I love it so much. I mean, I love talking to people. I love meeting people from all different walks of life. I've worked in the service industry for years, and you meet all sorts of people. And I've had so many interactions that have really shaped my perspectives on life. And so I went down to Ole Miss for my freshman year, and I spoke to tons and tons of sororities, fraternities, college students all over. And this semester, I did a lot of sororities around the country. So I've been doing that. And my mom and I are actually working on writing a book together right now, too. So
Congratulations. Excellent. Excellent. A way to really put into more of a legacy form, some of the things that you've learned along the way. Um, let's talk a little bit about media and social media, because well, I think social media is pretty ingrained in many people's lives on a day-to-day basis. But speaking to journalists, certainly getting up in front of a live television camera is kind of a different deal and pretty intimidating to a lot of people. I remember my first my first experience. I had gone through media training. I had been speaking publicly already, but live television is daunting. And I just remember them saying, just pretend the two of you are having coffee. Do not think about all the people behind the camera. You're just having coffee, and be really concise and know what your message is. And that got me through. And then I think once you've got a couple under your belt, then you're like, okay, I know what to expect here, and I know how to craft this 3-minute moment that I have to the best impact. What did you have any preparation? How did you come to, let's just talk traditional media at first. What was their first experience like? How did you get into it?
So I have never had any media training or anything like that. And it was definitely, and still is, scary for me to be interviewed and that kind of thing. But I believe I started emailing a bunch of news stations to get Maria and I on. And so I did a story with Channel 2, Denver Channel 2, and they came to one of my big presentations for the city of Lone Tree. And it was really, really cool. And she had interviewed me before at my house and got background information. And then I had a reporter from Colorado Public Radio reach out to me, and that was really, really cool because I had a few friends who were like, my parents heard you on the radio. And so she did a really great story on me and just my coping mechanisms and being at the time teenager in that time. And yeah, it was really, really great. And I did a few more in college as well. But I
Yeah.
guess for me, I'm not the
What
most polished person, so I just have to remind myself it's okay if I stumble or, talk in circles because that's just who I am.
Well, and honestly, journalists are looking for authenticity. So they don't want the perfectly polished person who's memorized their 5 talking points. They want to talk to a real human being,
Yeah.
and really experience things in the storytelling in the moment. So being a little rough around the edges is good. And the other thing that I remember the media training told me is that, this is a partnership. And just like you did, that outreach to journalists is important. You can't wait for them to stumble upon you. They're probably not going to find you, but they're often very hungry for content. So by reaching out and saying, "Hey, I've got a good story here. Will this fit with your priorities?" Really helps them, because they're always looking for new content and they're always looking for important stories to tell, not just statistics, not just programs, but stories to tell. So I do want to just encourage our listeners to think about the fact that they are actually helping journalists out when they're doing this. In addition to getting their message out, journalists can be really grateful for that outreach. Did you ever develop any relationships with particular journalists with being out there in the media often?
Unfortunately, not really, because that was the time when I was about to graduate high school,
Mm,
and then I went straight down to college. So, I mean, I kind of just, my life moved. Obviously, I came home for Thanksgiving and those types of things, but I do keep in touch with the reporter from Colorado Public Radio, though. I know her son. So
yes. And that's just another tip, right? Is that be a trusted resource for these journalists, as someone who knows something about some things, because they're going to come to you and say, "Do you know anything about X, Y, and Z aspect of this topic? Or can you find me a resource or a citation or something around this kind of thing?" And you can say, "Yes, absolutely. What's your deadline? Like, how quickly do you need it?" And they just appreciate that responsiveness. That trust building relationship can be very reciprocal, as you're helping them out. What was your favorite or most impactful media opportunity, do you think?
probably the one for Colorado Public Radio because she dove into some of the music I listened to. And I always knew I listened to a lot of music, but my Spotify Wrapped last year, it said you listen to more music than 98% of people. And so I really was like, wow, I listen to a lot of music and I just love it. I go to so many concerts. And so she kind of was interested in that. And I told her about how music has been a coping crutch for me, especially because being an only child and losing my dad, you have those late nights where you are just hurting so bad and you don't want to call your friends and wake them up, and I didn't want to wake my mom up and worry her. So that was kind of an outlet for me to just let it out and feel what I needed to feel, or just let it out.
Yeah, that's great. Because not only did that tell a very impactful story about how you have gotten through, but it also shared some very tangible, easy to reach coping skills that other people can learn from and adapt for themselves. That's a perfect example of a really well crafted story that the media can tell on our behalf, right? Because so much of the time, the media is drawn to press releases with daunting death data or, um, overwhelming high profile suicide deaths or overdose deaths. And with a constant, I call pounding the drum of death data, the general population often gets hopeless or feeling helpless that we can do anything to change. But stories like yours, especially about coping or living through some of these things, can really provide a sense of hope and community and coming together and finding our way through, which again shifts the general narrative in the population that there are some things we can do to help ourselves and help other people. Have you continued to find that impact in the people that have listened to you?
Yeah, definitely. Especially when I was posting videos on Instagram. I mean, luckily I took screenshots of all of them before my account was hacked, but I have so many messages of people who related to it in some way, whether they've experienced a suicide or they're living with a mental disorder, or they grew up with a parent who had a substance use problem or substance use disorder. I've really seen just how many people can relate to some aspect of what I went through.
Yeah, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the social media side of media relations. What was that like for you in the beginning days, and what lessons did you learn from doing it in a way that, really helped you and helped the people listening to your posts or experiencing your communications?
Yeah, so I definitely posting the videos was great. I did some videos where I would put a form link and people could swipe up and ask different questions or just say things anonymously. And that was really cool to just be able to engage with people. And I got a lot of responses as well. And I also, a lot of my social media, I really grew that experience when I was in Active Minds, which for people that aren't familiar with it, it's a big nationwide mental health organization for specifically young people. And so I was president of our Ole Miss chapter. And one of the things I really wanted to do was create different forms of content to educate. So we would do different things like understanding blank. So understanding schizophrenia, and then going through the DSM-5 and all the different, I was very, very good about credible resources and just kind of educating on these things, because I know when I grew up, I didn't have any type of mental health literacy that I can remember. And now we know so much more. And so just really, I think using social media to spread information and improve mental health literacy, I think is really, really crucial for reducing stigma and just spreading awareness in general. So I definitely used social media when I was in Active Minds a lot as well.
So a couple things there for takeaways. One is to join a group maybe that has some tools that you can learn from, and also have that sense of group support while you're out there doing this work. Because let's face it, it's not always easy. It's not always easy to be vulnerable. It's not always easy to be a leader in this space. And there's lots of, misinformation, prejudice, and discrimination out there that can come back at you. So being part of a group kind of helps buffer. And then the other thing that you said, an Active Minds is an amazing, amazing resource. Allison Malman, the founder, and I lost our brothers fairly close to each other, even though I'm way older than she is. We had our losses around the same time and kind of started our journeys together. So I'm always looking out on the horizon of the many amazing ways that she's been leading and expanding the Active Minds initiative that she started after her brother's death. The other piece that you said that I just want to call out is, when you are a messenger, it is important that you know what you're talking about. So getting that credible information, looking at research, looking at places where you can be best informed about mental health literacy matters. We have too much misinformation and myths out there to keep continuing those misdirections. We need to be credible messengers within our storytelling in a way to make advocate, and so people trust us and they come back to us in that way. What else did you learn in the social media experiences that you had that might be good lessons learned for people just starting off in this space?
I would say organizing what you're going to post. I think at that time I was just kind of posting random stuff, whatever I wanted to, but creating a content calendar, really getting yourself together and having it all organized. I personally, sometimes my Google Drive just I've got 8 folders with all different stuff, and I'll have a document that has 2 sentences on it, and so just really getting yourself organized and making sure, like you said, that all of your information triple checking all of it. If you are doing mental health awareness or suicide prevention, definitely making sure that you are know your stuff.
Yeah. And then videos. You said your video content was really engaging for people, and that seems to be the case everywhere. Is that when we hear people and look at them, we feel more connected to them than if it was just writing or just a static post. What did you learn that you might be able to share that helped your videos get more engagement?
I would say definitely interact with people, interact with whoever's commenting or DMing, especially that kind of stuff. And then you do have to study your audience of who you're talking to. And that's something I learned really when I started speaking to different groups. So when I do a sorority presentation, the way I present it is going to be a lot different than the way I would do a fraternity presentation, because you have to target your content to whoever you're really trying to speak to as well.
Could you give us an example of how you might shift your content from one audience to another?
So for that example, I guess for fraternities, I've done a few fraternities and I'm a peer of theirs, a girl. And so you kind of have to navigate it the right way. So you earn their respect. And I'm not going to have pink on my slides or, that kind of stuff. So making the slides look different. I always love to use specific data because, like we said, data shouldn't be the whole presentation, but it does show the severity of what we're talking about. So I always like to use specific data targeted towards certain groups. So if I'm talking to an Active Minds chapter, I'm going to have college specific statistics and information. And so whenever I do sororities now, I always review all of the school resources and go over every single center, online resource that their school has to offer.
Great example. Know your audience, know the local resources, tailor your message in a way that is relatable with your stories, with your data, with even the design of what you're putting out there. You also talked a little bit, I just want to go back because I thought it was brilliant. When you had the videos, you had some kind of form that they could engage in anonymously and confidentially. I think that's a really important tip and takeaway, because sometimes people don't want to be posting publicly from their account when they have a sensitive question or a sensitive reflection to give. Can you talk about how you set that up and how that worked?
I can't remember what it was called, but it was an application. It was totally free. I just created an account and you just submit whatever you wanted to submit questions. And I mean, you could even do it with a Google form. And
yeah, a Jot form or Google form probably would get you
I
there.
used a certain platform. It's so long ago, I honestly can't remember. But yeah, I got a lot of questions and comments and feedback, and it was really helpful as well to see what people were interested in.
Excellent. Well, Alice, I'm going to do a quick recap, and then I'm going to come back to you for some final thoughts, some final takeaways, action steps, tactics that people who are thinking about maybe engaging their storytelling with a public audience might be something that they are curious about or interested to do, whether that's through their social media platforms or through traditional media like television or print or radio. So if you're just tuning in, I am speaking with the amazing Alex Bush about the transformational power of public sharing. And we're talking about ways that public storytelling can make a difference in communities, with individuals, and with even cultural change. We have a movement here that needs these stories to get us to the place where we need to be. That's going to be unparalleled by the way that statistics or just warning signs or just basic mental health literacy will be able to do by themselves. Alex shared her poignant story of not only losing her dad to suicide, but multiple friends and acquaintances in a very short period of time, and feeling called into this work to try to make a difference by giving people hope and letting them know that they're not alone. Emmy-nominated, Emmy Award-winning film, Teens to Teens, really does also speak to the power of peers talking to each other about their lived experience and offering support and hope in that space. We talked about the importance of developing relationships with journalists as a reciprocal kind of thing. They need us and we need them to help spread messages. So building trust in those relationships, becoming a little bit media savvy and understanding how the media works, fast timelines, they need credible information, they need powerful stories, and they need them yesterday. And being that responsive person that they can depend on to help turn these stories around quickly in a way that's going to make an impact is what they're looking for. And of course, we're looking for amplification of hopeful messages, social ID resources, ways that we can help ourselves and help other people. We also talked about getting involved in groups to help amplify the message, whether that's a sorority or a fraternity or Active Minds if you're on a college campus, or other local community groups. NAMI is very active in local communities, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. There's lots of coalitions and task forces, and that you can lean into those when you start becoming public as a source of support and self-care for yourself. You also talked about the importance of getting your thoughts organized, which really helps you and helps your message. Putting together a content calendar, being very clear on what your key messages are. So if you're having an interview with someone, you can always tie everything back to those key messages so that they get consistently reinforced and so that you are in control of some of that narrative. You also emphasize the importance of engagement with your audience. Know your audience, know what their pain points are, know what their needs are, know what their languages and customs are, so that you are meeting them where they're at. They don't have to stretch to figure out where you're at, and that you're giving answers to problems that they already identify as a way to link into that. And also providing some anonymous and confidential ways for them to ask questions back and engage with you, and you respond back and show that you are interested in supporting them. All of these are incredibly important tips, Alex, for both traditional media as well as social media engagement. What is one final thing that you want our listeners to make sure that they don't miss from today's conversation?
Well, I would say specifically to people who lost someone to suicide, we both have, and we both know it's such a complex grief, and there's truly no right or wrong way to navigate it. But I just want to say that every emotion you're feeling is valid, whether it's sadness, anger, guilt, shock, a combination of emotions. It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. I remember when I graduated college and I felt an emotion towards my dad I hadn't felt before, which was anger. And I was disappointed and resentful of the fact that he wasn't there to share the moment with me. And for a while, I tried to hold in that anger because I felt guilty for feeling that way. But when I finally confided in my mom about it, she reminded me that no matter how much time has passed or what's going on, it's okay to feel all and every emotion that arises. And one thing I've learned is the importance of letting those feelings in, as painful and as overwhelming as it becomes. Allow yourself to process in your own way, and you absolutely don't have to face it all at once, and you don't have to do it alone. But when you try to push these emotions down and ignore them, it doesn't make them go away. It just sets them aside for another day. And letting those emotions in doesn't mean they'll overwhelm you forever. The more you let yourself feel them, the more you allow yourself to begin healing little by little, day by day. And then the other thing, real fast, I would just say to mental health leaders is to really utilize youth voices and involvement. As someone who started mental health advocacy work at 16, I've really seen just how passionate younger generations are about mental health and mental health related topics. I've had many younger people over the years tell me how much they want to do something like I'm doing. So it's important to provide those opportunities and spaces for younger people to contribute. And we already know that young people are reporting high rates of poor mental health, which is not a good thing. But I think this also shows that they are more aware and open to talk about mental health challenges, which is a good thing. And regardless of what's driving that willingness gives us a chance to address these topics and really confront stigma. Our youth and young adults can bring so much to the table. And for me, being on the board of NAMI Mississippi has been so amazing. And I'm so grateful to all of them who welcomed me, because there is value in having that representation. And at the end of the day, mental health advocacy and suicide prevention are about setting society up for a better tomorrow, and involving young people in this work builds a stronger foundation for the future of mental health and our future mental health leaders. So it is really critical for young people to be a part of these advocacy initiatives and programs. And it's equally as important for mental health leaders to prioritize that participation as well.
You are just so eloquent, Alex. And I just want to comment on the both things that you just said there. So first, what you just modeled in your message to other loss survivors is exactly what the power of public sharing can do. You normalized a whole range of difficult emotions that people might think, oh my gosh, I'm the only one that felt blank, felt anger at my loved one, felt rage, felt guilt, felt shame, right? And when you say it out loud, people will go, okay, I'm not the only one. And these are common experiences that people have. And really understanding that emotions really are just signals of things that we need to process, signals of things that we need to resolve. They're not good or bad in themselves. They might be uncomfortable, but they're important signs that our body's trying to get to us. And you just totally validated and normalized those experiences for all of the loss survivors out there who might be struggling with, especially anger. That's a tough one. And then their call to mental health leaders to engage the voices of young people is also so important. I think too often, I'm in spaces where there's this kind of paternalistic view of young people that we have to protect them. We're not ready. They're not ready. They're not bad. They're not this. They're not that. But what I've seen is that young voices are powerful and inspiring. I remember very distinctly in a legislative session where we were with the committee trying to advocate for funding for a mental health resource. And the representative had brought me in as a so-called expert. And I said to her, who am I today? Am I, the so-called expert, or am I bereaved sister? What voice do you want me to have? And she said, be the expert, tell them about the statistics and the research and all of that. I said, great, I'm going to take 30 seconds to do that. And then I'm going to give my time to this young person who's actually been benefited by this research, because they're going to bring the house down. And that is exactly what happened. It was their young, powerful voice that was so authentic and real that got this very divisive committee to come together. So I've experienced it firsthand. And your story, again, being on a board for NAMI, is also very inspiring to a lot of communities maybe that are thinking, well, we're not so sure about the youth voice. So thank you for modeling that as well. Alex, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, people can reach out to me through LinkedIn and Instagram. Like I said, I'm kind of getting back into using Instagram now, but I check both of those daily. And then my website is just alexbushspeaking.com.
Excellent. And we'll put all of that into the show notes so that you can find her through there. Thanks again so much, Alex, for your work, for your advocacy, for all the things you're doing, especially to empower youth voices in this space. Keep going. I hope our paths continue to cross. Thank you to all the people behind the podcast making it happen. Of course, there's a huge village for anything like this. So thank you, Mitchell and Chase and Dave and Elias and Whitney and many others that are contributing to the development of this message to you. And thank you all to the listeners who tuned in today to hear this important story. And hopefully took away some action steps in this process. If you're considering taking action steps towards sharing your story publicly, this is one of many things that you can do. And you don't have to do it, right? This is your story. You have control over when and how and to whom you share it. So in closing, open your heart, challenge your thinking, and take action to save lives. Together, we can restore dignity and sustain a passion for living.